Assalamu alaikum, namaste, shalom. This is Kazantma Het-Heru with another broadcast for you. And today I want to talk about why we are all insane and doomed. That's a very bold statement, but I want to really get deep into this so you understand what's going on and why this is so. You know, what I see a lot going on, especially from the New Age and conspiracy theory community, is everyone trying to find a solution as to what is going on in the world. And many of them hit upon the idea of, well, you need to be more spiritual, or you need to see everything as oneness, you know, get back to source. And those ideas are altruistic, they're pretty good, but they don't get to the core of the problem. And if you're not going to attack it from the core, then everything else it's kind of like fighting the Hydra. You cut off one head, another one grows. And that's exactly what we're dealing with in terms of the evil that has encapsulated the planet. And this evil has done so in a very insidious way, because what it has done is it's controlled our minds and having us think in a certain thought process. And when the foundation of from where you're thinking from is incorrect, everything that you do and that springs forth from that will be incorrect. You understand what I'm saying? So but the way that we have to look at things is we have to go back to our ancestors and see things. We can see that when we go back in time and look at the way that they lived way back when in antiquity, we don't see the problems that are vexing us today. We don't see serial killers. We don't see mass murderers. We don't see pedophiles. We don't see robbery. We don't see political plotting and hoarding of wealth. We don't see that stuff. And there's a reason for that. It's because that our ancestors adopted a way of life, not a spiritual life, but a way of life that encompasses an integrated brain thinking. Along the line, the timeline was disrupted, and we started to stop thinking using both sides of the brain and only started thinking in terms of the left segregated thinking process. And when that happened, the things began to go haywire. We can see that the world started going in the wrong direction. And this is the very reason why you have your you know, the Roman Emperor Constantine changing things, changing the Bible. And what he was really trying to do is he was trying to pervert the manner in which we think, from taking us to a dual brain system to a singular brain system, to where we only think in disconnected, disjointed ways. So let me get a little bit deeper into this. Now, I said that the masses of people or we all are insane. We are, because you cannot effectively come up with a solution. You can't look at the world and say, we need to do this, we need to do that, using the same thought process that created the problem. So what you have to first do is look at yourself and say, the paradigm from which I'm thinking from, is it integrative? Does it understand that there's a duality to life, that there's a paradox? When you can actively accept that life is about paradoxical thinking and about interrelationships, then you start to think in a very sane and humanity or humane way, is what I'm trying to say. But when you start to think in a segregated thought process, which is based on the Hegelian dialectic or based on syllogistic thinking, meaning that you're looking at two sides as one is good and one is bad, and you're polarized in that way, then you create problems in the world where you set up these dynamics where there is combatants, where there is one is good and another is evil. And that's where you have the Muslim holy wars come from, the Christian crusades come from, slavery comes from, racism, sexism. All of that springs forth out of the left brain, which is why you'll see in ancient Egyptian mythology, the left brain was symbolized by Anubis, Set, or what we call as Sebek. So two different deities, sorry. You have Set, and then which Set is the combination of left brain and the animal spirit, and then you have Anubis, or Sebek, left brain thinking. But in its proper form, Anubis is good. You know, Sebek is good. And he is complemented by Ma'at, which is whole brain thinking or integrated brain thinking, because Ma'at is relational thinking. See, in this world, you go to the universities and you study, and everything is just told to you with no relationship. Because you know that when you work on a problem and you discover the solution for yourself, the only way that you were able to discover the solution for yourself is because that you had a relation to the problem and the solution. You solved it on your own. But when somebody tells you something and you're regurgitating it, that's secondhand knowledge. So you did not have a hand in coming up with the solution, so there was no relational thinking involved. So relational thinking gets you to understand that there is a connection and interdependence between all things in the universe. Segregated thinking tells you that you are separate. And with segregated thinking, which is what we have been doing today in modern world and we have mastered, segregated thinking can take you into generalizations. So you can say things like, for example, these countries of color are shitholes. But that's not relational thinking, because relational thinking would tell you that the reason that those countries are in a state of deprivation is because the United States has gone over there, invaded, colonized, raped the countries of the natural resources, and put them in a state of poverty. That's relational thinking. That's an understanding of the context. But segregated thinking just says, oh, people of dark skin complexion come from shithole countries. Do you understand what I'm saying? And typically of the left brain, it cannot reconcile opposites. So it sees things diametrically opposed to each other, while the right brain will say these things complement each other and they work together to support the whole. Now, when you're not thinking in integrated brain thinking or paradoxical thinking, then you're not mentally balanced. And that's true. That's what Ma'at is all about. Ma'at is about balance. You know, so you will see somebody and say, this person who is drug addicted, he's a castaway, he's a reject of society. Whereas whole brain thinking will say that, you know what, society has done something to bring this person to the verge of stress and dependency on a drug. You know, and it's the same way when you get into segregated thought process, when you can see that you know, you have a minority population that's hooked on crack, and suddenly there's a war on drugs and locking them up. But then you have another population which are basically white, and they are hooked on opiates, and we say, let's get them help. Let's have sympathy for them. And that's, you know, that's not balanced thinking. That is not relational and whole brain thinking. This is why I'm saying to you that when you start looking at the founding fathers of this country, and when you start looking at the ministers or preachers that you go to Sundays, you have to understand that these are very sick people. And I'm not joking. I'm not being hyperbolic. These are very sick people, because for you to have it within you to enslave another group, to fault them for something that you caused, is telltale signs of insanity. Start thinking like, if we want to get ourselves out of the situation that we're in, where there's conflict in the world, where there's fighting, where there's political unrest and bipartisan politics, where there's racism, where there's sexism, how are you going to deal with that when you're thinking from a framework that only things polarize in those terms? How are you going to solve that? You're not going to solve it by saying the answer is spirituality. Yes, that's a good start. But you got to say you are mentally not well because you only are using a portion of your brain, and the portion that you're using is creating the problem that we're trying to solve. So we have to go about a holistic perspective that encompasses an understanding that all things in life are sacred, all things are dependent upon one another, and that all things are important. The mere fact that you cannot keep in your mind the idea of opposites and not label and define them as against one another shows you that you are not as intelligent as you think you are. And we give credit to all these guys, Edison, Einstein, and all of them. But I'm telling you that the basis of their knowledge has always been left brain. And because the society elevates that left brain thinking without looking at the right brain, because they don't want you to think in those terms. They want you to eradicate any idea of integrated brain thinking, because once you start adapting that type of thinking, you'll see how erroneous the things that they're putting out there in modern media, and you'll start to see through the facade of what they're preaching and teaching. Because basically the news media, Hollywood, all of that is just a mind programming thing. They're just trying to brainwash you into accepting their sick definitions and terms. And they play this game all the time and then wonder, why can't we have world peace? Well, we can't have world peace when you have the definition that someone else is your enemy. That's the problem there. When you, and the great story of Osir and Set, or Osir, Osiris, and Isis, the whole thing about that story is that when Heru, or Horus, defeated Set, he did not kill Set because he understood that even though Set was evil, there was a place for him and that he served a purpose, and that the idea of Set being evil wasn't something that the Kemetic people embraced. They looked at all things as helping to further your spiritual development, that all things were just challenges. They weren't opposing you because you're one with everything, so you can't oppose yourself. So, you know, when you sit there and you listen to these ministers and you listen to these politicians and you listen to these scholars and you go to these universities that have you regurgitate information and understand that they are the ones that have created the problems and the ills of the world. And they're pretending that they have the solution when they don't, Because the one thing that they don't want to do is go back to our ancestors and look at how we knew how the brain was set up, how the spirit was created and categorized. They knew all of this. This is ancient knowledge that they now want to call it pagan, occult, mystical, new age. It's of no value. But of course they're going to say that because that's what the left brain does. It's only a concrete thinking. You can't get into abstract or metaphysical thinking. It doesn't do that. This is why you have a society where people say, well, if I can't see, hear, feel, and touch it, and it doesn't exist. Of course, that's what you're using, the left brain. But everything has its place. In ancient Egypt, there were 3 forms of writing. There was the hieroglyphic, there was hieratic, and demotic. And those 3 writings were used in a way to appeal to different hemispheres of the brain. Hieroglyphics, which I believe dated back to, 3100 to 2160 BC, and hieratic 2160 to 1780, and then demonic came with 1000 BC, and directly after demonic came Coptic. Those different forms of writing were used for different specific purposes. You know that the hieroglyphics were used on the temple walls and carved in the stones. The hieratic was used more for like record keeping, accounting, and writing letters. And the demotic was used for like legal business. But the point I'm making is this: hieroglyphic was a right brain form of thinking because it dealt with the visual images, and hieratic and demonic were geared a little more toward the left brain. They understood that in approaching life, in dealing with life, you cannot always use one frame of thinking, one perspective of thinking. Now, in our modern world, yes, there are times, especially when you're using math, that there is a correct answer. You know, 1 and 1 is 2, okay? And for this, you need your left brain because that's what it does. It's a master of that. It gets into the facts and the numbers. But then there are also situations such as the law, morality, religious, that you need spirituality, that you need the right brain. Do you understand? Or integrated brain thinking. The problem is we have taken the left brain and used it for everything, for everything. And that's what has caused the problem. Whereas our ancient ancestors knew that, you know, there was a multifaceted way to approach and see life. And it wasn't just from one perspective. It was to understand that life really is about paradoxes, or what we call paradoxes. It's about irreconcilable opposites, right? Okay, so let's reconcile those opposites. Have the thinking for now. And we can apply syllogistic thinking where it's needed, but not in situations where it is not needed. When you're looking at a child and the child's not doing well in school, you cannot place a left brain process on that. You have to say, well, you know what? There are different aspects to learning. We can start with the hierarchy of left brain, right brain, and we get down to the deeper levels of tactile, kinesthetic, auditory, and visual. So are you presenting the lessons in a way that the child who has a natural inclination to one of these things can process the information? But again, when you don't think about these things in contextual relational thinking, you think the child is stupid. When a child has a strong point in one way of learning, which could be tactile, which could be kinesthetic, those ways. Because everything is painted with a broad brush that has only two colors, black and white. Those two, it doesn't exist. And this is why we're running around in this day and society, and we are not mentally well people. We are not. We think we're so high on the intellectual scale. We think we're so smart because we've got this left brain thing that we have used to the max. And yet the world is falling apart. It's crumbling. Presidents who have no experience just because they're winning a popularity contest, going around insulting nations, and you think that this society is at the top of the totem pole? No, we're at the bottom. We're living in the dark ages. Because our ancestors knew one thing, that if you're not working from a spiritual perspective and from whole brain thinking, then your society is doomed. There's no way around it. And if we keep on the present course, adapting this left brain thinking only, and we don't see that the solution to get to the core of what's causing the problem has to do with the way we think, and not adapting a scripture or holy book. That's not going to work. That was tried. That experiment was tried and failed. It was tried in the witch hunts, where you had these religious men and women who hunted women and burned them at the stake because they believed they were witches. We tried this with the Christians who enslaved Africa and raped it of its natural resources, even though they praised Jesus. We tried this. We tried this holy book savior crap, and it doesn't work. That's because it's still left brain. It was all left brain. We have to get and use something else. We have to say, this is not working. What else is available? Okay, because we are in trouble. So anyway, that's my message for the day. I want you to think about that, and understand next time you're going to church or your sermon and you're engaged in a verbal discourse, or your preacher's talking his head off, understand it's all left brain. And that doesn't get to the root of the problem and solve the problem at all. In fact, it causes more problems, because that left brain loves to label, define, and call things evil and good, and that's all it can do, and it can't see the metaphysical aspects to life. It only look at the concrete. It doesn't look at the abstract. So if you like this video, hit the like button, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel and share this video with family, friends. And until my next video, this is Gasark Het-Heru, and Amen Ra.